But the one thing that is a rightful to be cautious about with these AIML models is the need for the transparency and explainability behind the results that these models are being generated here.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Payments TV. My name is John Gaffney. I'm Chief Content Officer here. Very excited about today's conversation on transforming payments via AI. You know, AI is rapidly changing the way banks and financial institutions operate. They make payments faster, they make them more secure. They can help spot fraud before it happens. Today, we're joined by Eric Stratman, who is Senior Director of Analytics and Insights at Validify. Validify is a company at the forefront of using AI to deliver smarter, safer payment solutions. We're going to hear from Eric about how AI is shaping the future of finance, where the biggest opportunities lie, and what's next for the industry. Eric, welcome.
Pleasure to be speaking with you again, John.
Yeah, I like it. You're one of my favorite interviews, so
Good to hear that.
I'm looking forward to this one, Eric.
Yeah.
So Eric, banks are exploring AI. If you listen to some people, they're all the way in on. If you listen to some other people, but do you think banks are pursuing AI adoption aggressively enough, or are we still too cautious about the pace of change here?
Yeah, so the way that I kind of view this kind of question that comes up quite a bit is that, from my point of view, AI and machine learning have been integrated into these financial
Okay.
institutions. The main thing that's kind of changing is just what is that like the general sentiment and the definition of what AI is changing. From like my point of view, that term of AI has kind of broadened, so there's more kind of underneath that umbrella now. If you think of traditional credit scoring and credit risk models, some would even consider that to be AI, and that's kind of been a staple of financial institutions previously. But the one thing that is a rightful to be cautious about with these AI/ML models is the need for the transparency and explainability behind the results that these models are being generated here. And that is one thing that we see a lot, is that the hesitancy with the AI model results. For example, Validify's account validation solution has a component of AI ML as part of that, and some customers are hesitant about these results initially, but once they implement these solutions and start analyzing the results and the outcomes, they quickly begin to realize the benefits that the AI ML methodologies can provide, with some of the bad accounts that are being identified by these methodologies having as high as a 90% return rate. And so
Oh,
because of
wow.
this, customers that do kind of adopt these quickly and kind of realize the benefits are able to achieve better results more quickly.
So, Eric, I would think that if you were running marketing at a big bank, you would be more focused on messaging than maybe they are.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, with kind of Chat GPT, you see in these LLMs kind of the explosions there. And that is kind of typically what you would kind of think of as AI, at least from my point of view. But certainly machine learning has been around in these financial institutions for quite some time.
Yep. So, in your view, you mentioned account validation, and I know that's near and dear to your heart there, Validify. What are some of the most important or impactful use cases that you're seeing right now?
Yeah, exactly, John. One of the most important use cases that we are most focused on at Validify is regards to account validation and fraud detection, for that matter. With fraud becoming more sophisticated and more prevalent, I believe it was in a payments article earlier this year that was reported that around 28% heads of payment reported that fraud were impacting their operations. Well,
Yeah.
AIML is a tool that can be used to help prevent this. So if you think about third-party fraud or account takeover fraud, the fraudster is providing actual credible account information in order to game the system. But what AIML can do is kind of analyze that account behavior and that transactional behavior in the background to be able to identify if unusual behavior is occurring so that we can stop that fraud in real time. A simple example that I like to provide is that if you're traveling, sometimes when you go to an ATM, your bank might lock you out as saying this is not your usual location of where you're trying to extract that money from. Well, that's just a very simplified view of what AIML is really doing in the background. It's just trying to identify unusual behavior to stop fraud in real time.
So can it also streamline the processes of account validation? I mean, I would think eventually it could reduce costs and increase accuracy, correct?
Oh, absolutely. With pay by bank and digital payment processes are growing in that payment space, and a large part of that is because of the reduced costs compared to your traditional card payment processes. But a main component of this is making sure that the account you're trying to process is a valid account, because otherwise return costs, ACH return costs associated with that can kind of throw out that economic equation there. And as well, common methods of validating a bank account, such as like a micro deposit, can be costly at first, as well as that introduces high friction in the process. So you'll see an increased likelihood of those consumers abandoning the process when it comes to micro deposits. But this is where AIML can really shine as and help streamline that process, as you were saying. So where we can use that transactional data to analyze the patterns and the behavior of that account, so that our models can then validate whether or not the account is real or not. And that's an example that we have been seeing. There is a leading technology provider for convenience stores that switched to Validify's account validation product in order to marry these pay by bank capabilities with their loyalty card programs in order to approve more consumers and increase the overall payment success rate.
Wow. So they're able to integrate two parts of their business using your solution then.
Absolutely. Yep.
Oh, wow. What are some of the key challenges that are left, Eric? I mean, as you rightly said, AI is integrated. It is helping with account validation. But what are some of the challenges that you face, and what do you think some of the challenges banks are facing as they want to integrate it more?
Yeah, with AIML, there's a couple various challenges that always come up, right? A big one is just how do we implement that, right? So with these AIML models, it's very easy to kind of develop that in an ad hoc fashion, kind of in the background. But when it comes to in practice, consumers and bank and customers are really wanting this answers in real time or near real time. So the question becomes, how do we productionize these models? And certainly with API endpoints and other cloud-based services and the kind of the further development there with Azure and AWS, that solution has become a little bit easier. Another big challenge that I kind of alluded to previously was kind of reducing that black box nature that AI ML algorithms can introduce sometimes. So for example, when we have AI ML solutions, a customer may ask, okay, you've provided me this score with like a recommended action, but how do I trust this? Where do I, what is this score telling me? So it's on us on the product side to really be able to provide enough detail and transparency into how we're achieving that score and what that score really represents. So that way we are, giving the customers that and the banks that confidence in that decision and allowing them to answer those questions in real time. And then the final challenge that's kind of very near and dear to me is that AI is just the methodology behind these solutions. But what's really driving these solutions is the data behind the models. So it's very important that we're making sure that we put in quality data into the models so that when you do expand these solutions and increase the scalability of this, you're not, losing the effectiveness of that solution then.
So here's the nirvana we're all going toward, right? We have bank account data, we have behavioral analytics, we have AI-driven analysis, and as you said, do we have good data going into that? But we want to let good consumers go through a frictionless process and take bad actors down. Take me through some of the detail a little bit on how that happens in the Validify solution.
Yeah, in the Validify solutions, we're really trying to kind of marry up that, the bank account validation space and that fraud space, right? So we'll have these AI ML and like be able to analyze, as I kind of mentioned previously, the behavioral, the transactional patterns that we're seeing on these bank account and consumers, so that if you pass all the checks initially and you're making sure that the account is valid, they can kind of bypass some some of the next steps there. And so we're reducing those frictions on those good consumers. However, if there's some unusual behavior that we're seeing, we may want to flag that. And now that necessarily doesn't mean we're denying them at that point, but we may guide them to additional solutions like a bank login product or a micro deposit solution in order to make sure that we're validating that they are who they are.
Very interesting. So, Eric, last question for you. You guys are at the intersection of payments, risk, data intelligence, business intelligence. You guys do a lot of things, and you're at a very sensitive point in this business. What are some of the priorities you're focused on for the second half of the year, particularly as they relate to AI?
Yeah, one thing that we're always focused on is the data behind our solutions, right?
Yeah.
And part of that is continuously analyzing and generating insights from our own data consortium so that we can see trends in the populations and understand how potential outside factors are potentially affecting consumers within our database. And so by constantly learning about our data, that allows us to prevent that stagnation and be able to continuously innovate our solutions so that we're providing the best products for our customers.
Well said.
Yeah. And then, earlier this year, we released a new account validation product that partners our own proprietary data with other authoritative data sources. A big initiative on our end is to be able to continuously innovate and support around this solution. So we're providing the most robust account validation solution to our customers. And then the final one there is, marrying up account validation and fraud. We see that as two very close partners in this space. And so being able to provide strong indicators to our customers that be able to identify these fraudulent actors in real time to kind of help reduce returns and costs that are impacting operations.
All right. Predictive bank account intelligence and payment intelligence all come together at Validify. That's going to do it for this episode of Payments TV. My guest has been Eric Stratman. He's Senior Director of Analytics and Insights at Validify. Eric, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, John.